The sun's low position in the sky illuminated the swimming pool's surface with a warm and inviting golden glow. The sun was beaming, creating a shimmering appearance of liquid glass on the surface. I was enjoying the soothing sound of the river while lying on a float with my eyes closed. The sun and river were soothing me. In addition, I enjoyed the river's continuous sound. After a brief period of silence, the sound of footsteps approaching broke the silence. During the course of the conversation, I was able to pick up on my stepfather saying, "Hey kiddo," in a manner that struck me as being rather humorous. I couldn't contain my excitement when I saw him standing at the edge of the pool, his toned body shining brightly in the sunlight, a joyous smile on his face, and swim trunks that were a perfect fit for his form. I was relieved to see him when I opened my eyes a moment later. My heart leapt with happiness. It was with a sly smirk on his face that he said, "Hey, Dad, are you coming in? On the other hand, you will have to catch me first." I said this with a sarcastic and naughty sense of humor. "Hey, Dad, are you coming in?" was the topic of conversation. Immediately after that, he continued to dive into the pool, and I couldn't help but laugh at his antics. We were both giggling at the same time. I was experiencing a level of exhilaration I had never seen before when I finally got off the float and started swimming in his direction. It was at an all-time high. I tried to keep a light tone in my voice and to tilt my head back, despite the fact that my heart was racing extremely quickly. I did this in spite of the fact that my heart was beating really quickly. The sensation of cool water moving over my skin, which is really energizing, is something I enjoy very much. Because I was chasing him, the sun was warming my back as I went after him. What I was doing was pursuing him. Despite the fact that he gave the impression of being unable to move extremely swiftly, he was able to navigate his way through the water with relative ease. "Do you have any possibility of capturing me when it comes to the matter?" Simultaneously, he turned his head back, wearing a smirk and a humorous expression. "Avoid haste." I yelled out the desire that was driving my strokes at the very moment when I was finally able to close the space that separated us from one another. I was finally able to bring these two people together. As I moved forward, I grabbed his arm and drew him in the direction of me so that we could get closer to each other. When he turned around to face me, I heard the sound of his laughter, which was a deep and reassuring sound. I was relieved to hear it. When our faces were just a few inches apart from one another, he said, "All right, you win this time," while gradually dropping the volume of his voice. This occurred when our faces were only a few inches apart. When I was able to sense his warmth emanating toward me, the tension in the air moved to a level that was visible. This occurred at the same time. "I am thankful to you, Dad," he responded in a quiet tone. "There has been a great deal of practice." His eyes returned to my gaze after a brief minute of glancing down at my lips, and he continued to maintain eye contact with me for the entirety of the talk between us. "You've grown up so much," he quietly mumbled to himself. But there was something deeper in his eyes now, a yearning that stirred something inside me. A flood of adrenaline coursed through my body as he moved closer to us, and the water began to lap about our legs. The water began to lap over our legs as a result of the personal intimacy of the event. His voice was deep and smooth, and I believed that it would be useful for us to practice together more regularly. I thought we should practice more often because it would benefit us. I always wanted to teach you how to swim better. I felt as if I had been wasting time with you, and my heart rate increased as I moved closer to you. I also had the impression that I had been wasting time. It seemed as though I had been squandering my time. A couple more steps brought me closer to the target. He reached behind my ear and slowly pulled a wet strand of hair behind it while his fingertips lingered against my skin. His gaze became more gentle as he did this. This was something that he continued to do over and over again. In my own case, I experienced exactly identical emotions. In order to produce a kiss that was both delicate and innocent but nevertheless felt thrilling, I leaned in slightly, and our lips came together to create the kiss. This occurred before I had the chance to give myself permission to have an excessive amount of thought about the circumstance. His hands reached my waist, drawing me closer to him, stoking an internal fire within me. The warmth of his body fueled the fire. I could feel his hands drawing me in closer. At first, the kiss was timid. Nevertheless, as soon as our mouths touched each other once more, it became more intense. It was almost as if his hands were bringing me together with them. As soon as I glanced into his eyes, I was unable to recognize any signs of doubt. Rather, I saw nothing but desire reflected in his stare. I was unable to distinguish any symptoms of hesitation. I am not aware of the fact that he continued to keep his hands on my waist, with his thumbs barely brushing against my flesh. This is something that I am not aware of. On the other hand, it is certainly possible that he acknowledged taking a very slight step back. While I was nodding my head, I had the impression that there was an undeniable spark between us, and perhaps we shouldn't try to prevent it from happening but instead just let it happen organically. I found myself thinking that we should simply let it happen. After a brief moment, he gave the impression of being conflicted. However, he then drew closer to me, and his breath began to warm against my cheek. This occurred after he had given the impression of being conflicted. I spoke in a low voice and murmured, "You really want this more than anything else." I was referring to the fact that you really want this. He closed the distance between us once more, catching my lips in a passionate kiss that electrified every nerve ending in my body. Each caress resulted in the creation of a yearning that I had not been aware existed, and each kiss escalated as he continued to close the distance between us. What I didn't realize was that I was yearning for him. I was completely engrossed in the sensation, and it seemed as though every touch was sending sparks shooting back and forth between different parts of my body. We melted into each other as the water swirled around us, and his hands moved to my back, bringing me closer to him as we did so. This occurred while the water was spinning about us. By wrapping my arms around his neck and kissing him more passionately, I was able to make the initial kiss that we had more intense. As our kisses intensified, the exhilaration of forbidden love surged through my body. Our kisses were becoming more passionate. It was possible for me to comprehend what was taking place. When I glanced up at him with a blank expression on my face, I questioned him, "What if someone sees us? Do you allow them to do so?" This is when the idea came to me. He emphasized his need. "I want you, and I'm tired of the fact that I've been hiding it." As a result of his statements, I had a surge of desire, and I went in closer to kiss him once more, this time with a greater intensity. As this happened, the darkness engulfed us, leaving us on our own. As we lost ourselves in our own desires, his hand probed my body and drew me nearer to him, guiding us towards the water for our mutual submersion. He took this action to ensure our submersion together. In stark contrast to the chilly atmosphere of the pool, the warmth of our connection stood out so much more. "What do you mean when you say I questioned you during our passionate kiss?" I could feel my heart pounding, and he let out a gasp, his voice trembling with the weight of his feelings. The intensity of our kisses had risen, and I thought that a sense of urgency was forming between us. I wanted it because my desire had been growing for so long. Only our decisions mattered now, but I knew the results. I drew him closer to me as the sun fell below the horizon, casting a wonderful warmth around us. As we moved in sync, my body fit perfectly against his as we moved in the same direction. We were unable to find our way through the whirlwind of emotions that we were going through. The gravity of our choices was apparent to me. When I mumbled, "Let's not stop," he agreed, a fire burning in his eyes as he leaned in for another kiss. We both gave in to the moment when the world outside began to fade away, and when I did so, he leaned in for another kiss. Both of us gave in to the mood of the moment. As our lips touched once again, I was ready to face whatever lay ahead with him by my side. I was ready to explore whatever lay ahead. Our adventure together had just begun, and this was just the beginning. By that point, I could tell that our connection was growing stronger and that our passion was sparking something new and exciting that we could no longer ignore. I realized we could no longer ignore it. The intensity of our connection led everything in our immediate area to become hazy, and each kiss felt more urgent than the one that came before it. This happened because of our strong connection. When I ran my hands over his large shoulders and down his arms while we were jointly exploring this unfamiliar terrain, I was able to feel his pulse beating beneath my fingertips. I was able to do this because I was able to feel his heartbeat. This happened while we were discussing our individual experiences of venturing into this unexplored territory. The event caused a wave of heat to surge through me, sparking a fire that pulsated with each and every contact that I made. This was a consequence of the encounter. The refreshing water surrounded us, providing a striking contrast to the growing warmth between our bodies. The water was so overwhelming that it overpowered us. Now that we have reached the shallow end, let's move on to the next step. In the moment when I stepped onto the edge of the pool and felt the smooth tile against my skin, the atmosphere was thick with the anticipation that I was about to experience. During the course of his approach to me, he followed his body as it moved closer and closer to mine. As he got closer to me, he asked me in a low voice, "Is this okay?" He lowered his voice and posed the question in a more subdued manner. I barely heard my voice above a whisper when I made the statement. I was having a difficult time collecting my breath when I heard a person say, "I want to feel closer to you." His eyes sparkled with the desire to own them, and he gave a small nod in response. The desire was apparent, and as a result, it is more than acceptable. This is despite the fact that I was able to observe the trepidation in his eyes as our shoulders came into contact with one another. I smiled nervously and repeated the words 3 times as I said, "I want this." My chest was tightening up as I spoke those words. Before drawing in closer to me once more, he reached out and removed a strand of hair from my face by brushing it aside. He then took it away from my face. Following that, he moved closer to me for the second time. Even though it was softer, the kiss still had a smoldering intensity to it. The kiss was different. It was an innovative form of kissing. His hands were on my waist, and I could feel them dragging me in closer. The kiss became more passionate as it progressed. I am now in a closer relationship with him. It was enjoyable to feel my body react naturally to his touch. He exuded a warmth akin to a flame, and I found myself relishing the sensation of his touch. I was able to perfectly synchronize the movement of my lips with his, which resulted in a wonderful rhythm that was evocative of the rhythm of our hearts beating together. During the time that I was sinking inside him, I did not attempt to resist. Although he was holding me closely, I was filled with courage and a sense of daring to lean into the moment. His arms contained a force that I felt as he held me securely. I sensed the power within his arms as I wrapped them around his neck. When he whispered, "You feel so good," against my lips, I couldn't help but let out a hearty laugh at that very immediate instant. His words reflected my needs, and his breath was inviting. I could sense the yearning that was there in his words. The yearning that was underneath his remarks was something that I was able to pick up on. The amount of time I've spent longing for this is incalculable. Without a doubt, you are completely unaware of it. Despite the fact that my voice barely rose above a whisper, I confessed it, and the words barely made it out of my mouth before I had the chance to interrupt them. I was the one who admitted my guilt in the situation. In this particular instant, there was no shame. Rather, there was nothing but complete and utter honesty throughout the entire situation. His response was, "If that is the case, then let us not hold back." And he did so by barely brushing his lips against mine before catching them once more. He then continued to engage in this conversation. The kiss sparked a fire that spread throughout my entire being, and for me, it was a sensation that was simultaneously overwhelming and alluring. He was tracing the curves of my body and digging into my back, and I could feel the sensation of his hands doing both of those things. I was also aware of his hands probing my back, which was a fascinating sensation. Immediately after that, I pressed myself against him, my heart pounding rapidly, and I retreated for a brief period to recover my breath and replenish my lungs with air. I did this in order to get some air back into my lungs. He responded by saying, "This is really okay, SH," while making a gentle caressing motion with his fingertips on my cheek. When I finally started to realize the seriousness of what we were doing, this was the moment it happened. During the time that I allowed everything to take place, I did so with a feeling that was a mixture of excitement and apprehension, and I let my instincts guide the acts that I took. Although we were moving closer to one another, Ned's yearning was beginning to blend in with our lips as we were getting closer. Each kiss seemed like a promise as well as a declaration of our sentiments that we had not yet expressed to one another when we were together. During the course of the interaction, my fingers became entangled in his hair, and I became completely absorbed in the activity that was taking place by that point. At the same time as everything was taking place, his hands moved a bit lower, and he grabbed my waist with a firm hold. After everything came to an end, the only thing left was the intense longing that ignited between us like electricity. Nothing else was available for us at the time. All of the world around us started to disintegrate, leaving us all by ourselves. "I never expected to feel this way about you, and neither did I," Ethan muttered as I leaned into him. "I never expected to feel this way about you." It was during the time when he was saying, "I didn't either," that his voice was filled with passion. He said, "I never expected to feel this way about either of us." I could feel the heat rising between us as my body pressed against his. During the time that I was carrying it out, there was a pervasive sense of dependency in the air. His frenzied movements sent a chill down my spine. My spine was tingling with the sensation of shivers. The question, "What do his frenzied movements do?" sent a chill down my spine. Violent and frenzied. Our kisses be his frenzied movements sent a chill down my spine. Relying on audible words, we reverted to each other, our lips uniting as if the world had vanished. This occurred even though his speech was barely audible. As we went through the movements of losing ourselves in each other, time seemed to lose its significance, and each kiss and wave of warmth that I offered fueled a need that I had not known was even possible. As we went through the actions of losing ourselves in each other, I was able to experience a sense of yearning that I had never experienced before. While we were giving in to the moment, I tried to get him closer so I could feel his warmth against mine. All of us were also giving in to the situation. The pairing was perfect in every way. The connection between us was undeniable, and every kiss fueled our profound affection for each other. We held each other and marveled at our closeness as the sun set and shed a warm golden glow on the pool. Additionally, we were enjoying our closeness. He whispered in a low voice, "Let's make a commitment to keep this between us for the time being." The thought of being so close to him and discovering this new relationship was too tempting. He leaned in close to my mouth and mumbled the commitment. "Whenever something happens in the future, I will be here for you." I felt comfortable in his arms, and I had a sensation of belonging that engulfed me. "I will always be here for you. Always know that I shall be here for you." At the same time as he was speaking quietly, he delicately touched his lips to my forehead. Throughout the entirety of the chat, he did this. The thoughtfulness of his gesture filled me with warmth. In other words, I experienced the weight of his remarks pulling me back down to earth. This is what I am really saying. When I say this, I ask that you just believe me. I am aware that I answered with a heart full of love, and I am here for you. I am here for you. Hope and excitement filled my heart for what was to come. A thrilling trip just below the surface. I was filled with optimism and excitement. I realized we were heading in the same direction as we embarked on a journey filled with unknowns and limitless promise. After some reflection, I understood that we were both heading in the same direction.